Hey everyone. Today we're going to be making a fat donut caged with a decorative Viking knit spine. It stands up a little bit off of the edge of the donut, making it look like it's caged in there. And sometimes if it's loose enough, you can even spin it around in there. Although I wouldn't recommend it too much because some stones are soft and some wires will leave marks and little smears and weirdness. So anyway, looks like it's kind of hovering inside of the Viking knit cage. I think it's pretty cool, so I'm here to share it. And today on Wikipedia, we're going to be talking about UFO conspiracy theories. And there's a little blurb right here at the top of the page that says, the examples and perspectives in this article deal primarily with the United States and do not represent a worldview of the subject. As of May 2022. Underneath that it says, as of 9:46, Sunday, May 29th, 2022. In this video, I'm using a handy little tool that was turned by hand by an artisan on Etsy. I will leave a link in the bottom where I got it from. This tool is just so handy. It has a spiked point on one end that's super sharp. On the other end it has a seam ripper. And both ends are great for prying wires apart, pushing wires around. I really recommend a tool like this for everyone to have in your arsenal of tools. And this video is only about 20 minutes long, so I need to get right into the Wikipedia article. So here we go. UFO conspiracy theories are a subset of conspiracy theories which argue that various governments and politicians globally, and particularly the government of the United States, are suppressing evidence that unidentified flying objects are controlled by a non-human intelligence or built using alien technology. Such conspiracy theories usually argue that the Earth's governments are in communication or cooperation with the extraterrestrial visitors despite public disclaimers, and further that some of these theories claim that the governments are explicitly allowing alien abductions. Individuals who have publicly stated that UFO evidence is being suppressed include United States Senator Barry Goldwater, British Admiral Lord Hill Norton from NATO head and Chief of the British Defense Staff, American Vice Admiral Roscoe H. Hillenkoetter, first CIA Director, Israeli Brigadier General Haim Eshad, former Director of Space Programs for the Israeli Ministry of Defense, astronaut Gordon Cooper and Edgar Mitchell, and former Canadian Defense Minister Paul Hellyer. Beyond their testimonies and reports, they have presented no evidence to substantiate their statements and claims. According to the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, little or no evidence exists to support them, despite significant research on the subject by non-governmental scientific agencies. Scholars of religion have identified some new religious movements among the proponents of the UFO conspiracy theories, most notably Heaven's Gate, the Nation of Islam, and Scientology. Background. Personnel in the mid-1940s reported unidentified objects under various names. And now we're going to read through a list and explanations. Foo Fighters and ghost rockets. In November 1944, pilots flying over Western Europe by night began reporting fast-moving, ground-glowing objects following their aircraft. The objects, nicknamed Kraut Fireballs, or Foo Fighters, were variously described as fiery and glowing red, white, or orange. Despite initial suspicions that the objects might be secret German weapons, further investigation revealed that German and Japanese pilots have reported similar sightings. In 1946 and 1947, numerous reports occurred of so-called ghost rockets appearing over Scandinavian countries, primarily Sweden, which then spread into the other European countries. Flying discs and flying saucers. The Kenneth Arnold UFO sighting occurred on June 24, 1947, when private pilot Kenneth Arnold claimed that he saw a string of 9 shiny, unidentified flying objects flying past Mount Rainier at speeds that Arnold estimated at a minimum of 1,200 miles an hour. This was the first post-World War II sighting in the United States that garnered nationwide news coverage, and is credited with being the first of the modern era of UFO sightings, including numerous reported sightings over the next 2-3 weeks. Arnold's description of the objects also led the press to quickly coining the terms flying saucer and flying disc as popular descriptive terms for UFOs. In the weeks that followed Arnold's June 1947 story, at least several hundred reports of similar sightings flooded in from the US and around the world, most of which described saucer-shaped objects. A sighting by a United Airlines crew of another 9 disc-like objects over Idaho on July 4th probably garnered more newspaper coverage than Arnold's original sighting and opened the floodgates of media coverage in the days to follow. Roswell balloon and recovered disc hoaxes. On July 8, 1947, Roswell Army Field issued a press release stating that they had recovered a flying disc. The Army quickly retracted the statement and clarified that the crashed object was a conventional weather balloon. The Roswell incident did not surface again until the late 1970s, when it was incorporated into conspiracy literature. The Roswell balloon was far from the only misidentified disc. One potential disc recovered from the yard of a priest in Grafton, Wisconsin, was identified as an ordinary circular saw blade. More elaborate hoax saucers were found in Shreveport, Louisiana, in Black River Falls, Wisconsin, and in Clearwater, Florida. On July 9th, press reported that the recovery of a 30-inch disc from a Hollywood backyard in hoaxer was never identified. On July 11th, press reported the recovery of a 30-inch disc from the yard of a Twins Falls, Idaho home. On July 12th, it was reported nationally that the Twins Falls disc was a hoax. Photos of the object were publicly released. The object was described as containing radio tubes, electric coils, and wires underneath a plexiglass dome. Press reported that 4 teenagers had confessed to creating the disc. Fred Chrisman and the Maury Island hoax. After his June 24th sighting, Kenneth Arnold became famous practically overnight. Arnold was contacted by Raymond A. Palmer, editor at fringe sci-fi magazine Amazing Stories, who asked Arnold to investigate the story of 2 harbormen in Tacoma who reportedly possessed fragments of a flying saucer. Palmer sent $200 to fund the investigation. On July 29th, Arnold interviewed the harbormen, who claimed that one of the objects began spewing forth what seemed like thousands of newspapers from somewhere on the inside of its center. These newspapers, which turned out to be a white type of very lightweight material, fluttered to earth. The harborman claimed the craft emitted a substance resembling lava rocks that fell onto his boat, breaking a worker's arm and killing a dog. The harborman also claimed he was later approached by a man in a dark suit and told not to talk about the incident. Arnold interviewed Fred Chrisman, an associate of the harborman, who reported having recovered debris from Maury Island and having witnessed an unusual craft. Chrisman showed white metal debris to Arnold, who interpreted it as mundane and inconsistent with the harborman's description. Arnold contacted the Air Force, and 2 officers soon arrived to investigate. The officers conducted interviews, collecting the fragments, and took off in their plane to return to base. In the early hours of August 1st, the 2 officers died when the B-25 bomber they were piloting crashed outside of Kelso, Washington on their way back to California. Writing in 1956, Air Force officer Edward J. Ruppelt would conclude, the whole Maury Island mystery was a hoax. The first, possibly the second best, and the dirtiest hoax in UFO history, Ruppelt observed. The government had thought seriously of prosecuting the men. At the last minute, it was decided, after talking to the 2 men, that the hoax was a harmless joke and had mushroomed, and that the loss of 2 lives of the B-25 would not be directly blamed on the 2 men. The hoax was covered by contemporary press. Frank Scully would report on the events in his 1950 book, Behind the Flying Saucers. And Arnold would detail his experience in his 1952 book, The Coming of the Saucers. Major UFO incidents of 1948. On January 7, 1948, Captain Thomas Mantell, a Kentucky Air National Guard pilot, died in a crash of his fighter near Franklin, Kentucky, after being sent into pursuit of an unidentified flying object. The event was among the most publicized early UFO incidents. The chilliest whited UFO encounter occurred in the early hours of July 24, 1948, in the skies near Montgomery, Alabama. 2 commercial pilots, Clarence Childs and John Whited, claimed to have observed a glowing object pass by their plane before it appeared to pull up into the clouds and travel out of sight. The Gorman dogfight was a widely publicized UFO incident which took place on October 1, 1948, in the skies over Fargo, North Dakota. United States Air Force, USAF, Captain Edwards J. Ruppelt wrote in his best-selling and influential The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects that the dogfight was one of 3 classic UFO incidents in 1948 that proved to Air Force intelligence specialists that UFOs were real. Along the Chile's whited UFO encounter and the Mantell UFO encounter, however, in 1949, the USAF concluded that the Gorman dogfight had been caused by a lighted weather balloon. Chronology of UFO conspiracy theories. 1949. Winchell and the Soviets. On April 3, 1949, radio personality Walter Winchell broadcast the claim that it had been definitively established that the flying saucers were guided missiles fired from Russia. In response, the Air Force denied any such conclusion. The Air Force reportedly requested an FBI investigation into Winchell's claims, a request that was denied. Kehoe and the Air Force knowledge of UFOs. On December 26, 1949, True Magazine published an article by Donald Kehoe titled, "The Flying Saucers Are Real." Kehoe, a former major in the U.S. Marines, claimed that elements within the Air Force knew that saucers existed and had concluded they were likely interplanetary. The article examined the Mantell UFO incident and quoted an unnamed pilot who opined that the Air Force's explanation looks like a cover-up to me. The Gorman dogfight and the Chile's whited UFO encounter were also described. The article cited a supposed report from Air Materiel Command and claimed a rocket authority at Wright Field had concluded saucers were interplanetary. Concern over a public panic of the kind that supposedly occurred after the 1938 War of the Worlds broadcast is cited in the article as possible motive for the cover-up. Citing historic sources, Kehoe speculated that similar sightings have likely occurred for at least several centuries. The True article caused a sensation, though such figures are always difficult to verify. Captain Edward Rupert, the first head of Project Blue Book, reported that it is rumored among magazine publishers that Don Kehoe's article in True was one of the most widely read and widely discussed magazine articles in history. When Kehoe expanded the article into a book, The Flying Saucers Are Real, in 1950, it sold over 500,000 copies in paperback. In March 1950, the Air Force denied flying saucers exist and further denied that there were U.S. technology being covered up. Scully and alien bodies. In October and November of 1949, journalist Frank Scully published 2 columns in Variety, claiming that dead extraterrestrial beings were being recovered from a flying saucer crash. Based on what he said, was reported to him by a scientist involved. His 1950 book, Behind the Flying Saucers, expanded on the theme, adding that there had been 2 such incidents in Arizona and 1 in New Mexico. A 1949 incident that involved a saucer that was nearly 100 feet in diameter. In January 1950, Time magazine skeptically repeated stories of crashed saucers with humanoid occupants. It was later revealed that Scully had been the victim of 2 veteran confidence artists. In 1952 and 1956, True Magazine published articles by San Francisco Chronicle reporter John Phillip. The purpose to expose Newton and Dr. G, identified as Leo Jabbar, as oil con artists who had hoaxed Scully. 1950s. The 1950s saw an increase in both governmental and civilian investigative efforts and reports of public disinformation and suppression of evidence. The UK Ministry of Defence's UFO project has its roots in a study commissioned in 1950 by the MOD's then Chief Scientific Advisor, radar scientist Henry Tizard, as a result of his insistence that UFO sightings should not be dismissed without some form of proper scientific study. The department set up a Flying Saucer Working Party, or FSWP. In August 1950, Montanan baseball manager Nicholas Mariana filmed several UFOs with his color 16mm camera. Project Blue Book was called in, and after inspecting the film, Mariana claimed it was returned to him with critical footage removed, clearly showing the object as disc-shaped. The incident sparked nationwide media attention. Canadian radio engineer Wilbert B. Smith, who worked for the Canadian Department of Transport, was interested in flying saucer propulsion technology and wondered if the assertions in the just-published Scully and Kehoe books were factual. In September of 1950, he had the Canadian Embassy in Washington, D.C. arrange contact with U.S. officials to try to discover the truth of the matter. Smith was briefed by Robert Sarbacher, a physicist and consultant to the Defense Department's Research and Development Board. Other correspondence having to do with Kehoe needing to get clearance to publish another article on Smith's theories of UFO propulsion indicated that Bush and his group were operating out of the Research and Development Board. Smith then briefed superiors in the Canadian government, leading to the establishment of Project Magnet, a small Canadian government UFO research effort. Canadian documents and Smith's private papers were uncovered in the late 1970s, and by 1984, other alleged documents emerged claiming the existence of a highly secret UFO oversight committee of scientists and military people called Majestic 12. Again, naming Vannevar, Bush, Sarbacher was also interviewed in the 1980s and corroborated the information in Smith's memos and correspondence. Throughout the 1950s and early 1960s, Smith granted public interviews and, among other things, stated that he had been lent crashed UFO material for analysis by a highly secret U.S. government group which he wouldn't name. A few weeks after the Robertson panel, the Air Force issued Regulation 200-2, ordering airbase officers to publicly discuss UFO incidents only if they were judged to have been solved and to classify all the unsolved cases to keep them out of the public eye. In addition, UFO investigative duties started to be taken on by the newly formed 4602nd Air Intelligence Squadron of the Air Defense Command. The 4602nd AISS was tasked with investigating only the most important UFO cases, having intelligence or national security implications. These were deliberately siphoned away from the Blue Book, leaving Blue Book to deal with the more trivial reports. Kehoe and the Flying Saucer Conspiracy. In 1955, Donald Kehoe authored a new book that pointedly accused elements of the United States government of engaging in a conspiracy to cover up knowledge of flying saucers. Kehoe claims the existence of a silence group, or orchestrating this conspiracy. Historian of folklore Curtis Peebles argues the flying saucer conspiracy marked a shift in Kehoe's belief system. No longer were flying saucers the central theme, that now belonged to the silence group and its cover-up. For the next 2 decades, Kehoe's belief about this would dominate the flying saucer myth. The book features claims of a possible discovery of an orbiting space base, or a moon base, knowledge of which might trigger a public panic. The flying saucer conspiracy also incorporated in legends of the Bermuda Triangle disappearances. Kehoe sensationalized claims ultimately stemming from optical illusions of unusual structures on the moon. I don't have time left in this video to start the next section, which is Carl Allen and the Philadelphia experiment. There's still a lot left of this article. It goes through years by years, so I'm going to continue this article in my next episode, which will be episode 14.1, and it will be matching earrings made with tiny little cages on tiny little fat donuts that are just so cute and just fascinating to look at. Real eye catcher and dangly. Anyway, now I'm just droning on. Thank you so much for hanging in there with me for this episode, full of conspiracy theories and hovering donuts. And I'll talk to you next time. Like and subscribe. Thank you.